blood on Italian leather. That was usually Arian's biggest problem at 3 a.m. Tonight, it was the sterile, bleach-soaked air of a pediatric ICU. He expected to find his son surrounded by rival soldiers. Instead, he found a woman with a mop, calloused hands, and a heavy steel wrench. The steering wheel of the Audi was sticky. Arian didn't need to look down to know it was drying blood, and he didn't care enough to wipe it off. His knuckles were bone white, gripping the leather so hard his forearms cramped. The city blurred past the windshield, a smear of neon and rain. But all Arian saw was the text message flashing behind his eyelids. Safe house breached. Lyle at St. Jude's. South wing. Arian breathed through his mouth. His nasal passages were still clogged with the acrid stench of burning drywall and spent gunpowder from the ambush. He tasted copper. He tasted spearmint gum, long lost of its flavor. He took the corner, taking out a plastic trash can, the heavy sedan fishtailing before the tires caught the wet asphalt. He was a man who traded in control. He owned the ports, the judges, the silence of the city's underground. But right now, the universe was reminding him of the one truth he tried desperately to ignore. He was just a father, and his 7-year-old son was bleeding. Arian slammed the car into park halfway onto the curb outside the emergency room. He didn't cut the engine. He pushed through the sliding glass doors, ignoring the sharp squeak of his rubber-soled boots against the polished linoleum. The ER was a chaotic symphony. The rhythmic, high-pitched beeping of a heart monitor, the low, guttural moan of a drunk in the corner, the sharp sting of isopropyl alcohol and cheap industrial coffee hanging heavy in the air. "Sir, you can't," a security guard started, stepping out from behind a triage desk. Arian didn't slow down. He didn't even look at the man's face. He just reached into his ruined suit jacket, his thumb brushing the cold, textured grip of his Glock. He let the jacket fall open, just enough for the guard to see the black metal tucked into his waistband. The guard stopped talking. He stopped moving altogether. Arian found the stairs. He didn't trust the elevators. Elevators were steel coffins. Elevators were where you got cornered. He took the concrete steps 2 at a time. His lungs burned. His left shoulder throbbed where a piece of shrapnel had grazed him an hour ago, the blood hot and sticky against his cotton shirt. 4th floor, south wing, pediatrics. He pushed the heavy fire door open. It groaned on its hinges, a slow, metallic whine that echoed down the empty corridor. Arian drew his weapon. He kept it low, pinned to his thigh. He expected the worst. He expected the quiet hiss of a suppressed weapon, or the heavy booted footsteps of the men who had shot up his home. He expected to step over the bodies of the 2 guards he had assigned to Lyle. Instead, he found a yellow plastic caution, wet floor sign. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed a low, erratic 60 hertz buzz. One of the tubes flickered, casting long, jumping shadows across the pale green walls. Arian moved down the hall, his senses dialed to a razor's edge. He smelled it before he saw it. Not blood, not cordite. Ammonia, pine sol, the sharp, nose-burning scent of industrial floor cleaner. He rounded the corner to room 412. Sitting in a molded plastic chair outside the door, directly in his path, was a woman. She wasn't a cartel assassin. She wasn't a dirty cop. She was wearing a faded navy blue scrub top and baggy cargo pants. A thick gray cardigan was pulled tight around her shoulders, completely obscuring her shape. Her dark skin looked washed out under the harsh, flickering hospital light. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun secured by a frayed elastic band, with stray curls sticking to the sweat on her forehead. Across her lap rested a solid steel pipe wrench. It was easily 2 feet long, rusted at the teeth, and looked heavy enough to crack an engine block. Arian stopped. His finger hovered just outside the trigger guard of his pistol. His brain, wired for threats and betrayals, ground to a halt. He stared at her. She stared back. She didn't scream. She didn't throw her hands up. She just blinked, her eyes heavy with an exhaustion so deep it looked bruised into the skin beneath her lower lashes. She looked at the gun in his hand. She looked at the blood drying on his collar. Then she looked at his face. "You're tracking mud on my floor," she said. Her voice was raspy, completely devoid of panic. It was the voice of a woman who had worked 14 hours and had 0 patience left for the apocalypse. Arian's jaw tightened. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who just spent 45 minutes buffing this linoleum, buddy. So unless you plan on shooting me, I suggest you take a step back and wipe your boots." Arian felt a hysterical, manic laugh clawing at the back of his throat. He swallowed it down, tasting the copper again. "My son," he said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "He's in that room." The woman tilted her head. She didn't loosen her grip on the heavy steel wrench. In fact, her knuckles, ashy and cracked from harsh chemicals, went white as she adjusted her hold. "A lot of people came looking for the kid in this room tonight. None of them knocked." Arian's grip on his gun tightened. The air in the corridor felt instantly thicker, suffocating. "Who came?" "2 guys," the woman said, leaning back slightly in the uncomfortable plastic chair. The squeak of the cheap plastic seemed deafening in the quiet hall. "Leather jackets, smelled like cheap cologne and cigarettes. They tried the door." Arian felt his stomach hollow out. The men who breached his house. They had followed the trail. And I told them this floor was closed for maintenance." She gestured loosely with the wrench, the heavy metal catching the flickering overhead light. "They told me to move. I told them I was union, and if they didn't get off my wet floor, I was going to crack their kneecaps with this wrench and let them explain it to the cops downstairs." Arian stared at her. He tried to reconcile the image of this exhausted, middle-aged cleaning lady staring down 2 heavily armed cartel hitters with nothing but a plumbing tool and raw audacity. "They left?" Arian asked, the disbelief leaking into his tone. "They laughed," she corrected, rubbing her temple with her free hand. She smelled of stale coffee and sweat. "Then one of them took a step forward, slipped on the floor wax I purposely didn't buff out, and busted his chin open on the baseboard. I dragged my mop bucket in front of the stairwell door and jammed the lock with a broom handle. They gave up." She looked up at him, her dark eyes piercing straight through his expensive ruined suit and his hardened mafia exterior. "Now, you say you're the dad. Prove it. Because right now, you just look like the 3rd string of the same problem." Arian didn't argue. He didn't threaten her. He slowly, deliberately engaged the safety on his Glock and slid it back into the holster at the small of his back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands, usually so steady when holding a blade or a gun, trembled slightly as he swiped through his photos. He held the screen out to her. It was a picture of him and Lyle, sitting on a dock by a lake, both of them holding half-melted ice cream cones. Arian was actually smiling in it. It felt like a lifetime ago. She squinted at the bright screen. She looked at the boy in the photo, then up at Arian's battered, exhausted face. The tension slowly drained from her shoulders. She let the heavy wrench rest back against her thigh with a dull thud. "Room's open," she said quietly. "Doctor said it was a severe asthma attack brought on by smoke inhalation. They gave him a steroid shot and put him on a nebulizer. He's asleep." Aryan pushed past her. The heavy wooden door of room 412 clicked open. The sensory shift was immediate. The harsh smell of bleach vanished, replaced by the sterile plastic scent of oxygen tubing. The only sound was the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the nebulizer and the steady, reassuring beep of the heart monitor. Lyle was swallowed by the hospital bed. He looked tiny. A clear plastic mask covered his nose and mouth, a steady stream of mist puffing out with every labored breath. The thin hospital blanket was pulled up to his chest. Aryan stood at the foot of the bed. He was a man who commanded fear, who built an empire on violence and intimidation. But looking at his son's pale face, the erratic rise and fall of his small chest, Aryan felt entirely powerless. The suit felt too tight. The room felt too small. He reached out, his bloody, bruised fingers gently brushing the edge of the blanket. He didn't touch Lyle. He was too dirty. He carried too much death on him. He stood there for 5 minutes just watching the boy breathe, ensuring the rhythm didn't stop. When Aryan finally stepped back out into the hallway, the fluorescent lights felt harsher. The woman was still there. She had stood up and was currently wringing out a heavy cotton mop head into a yellow bucket. The dirty water splashed against the plastic. Aryan reached into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a thick money clip. It was a wad of $100 bills, easily 3,000 or 4,000. He held it out to her. "Take it," Aryan said, his voice flat. She stopped wringing the mop. She looked at the money, then at him. She didn't look impressed. She looked deeply annoyed. "What's that?" she asked. "Compensation," Aryan replied. "For watching the door. For the maintenance." She let out a dry, humorless scoff. She leaned on the mop handle, glaring at him. "I make $14 an hour, mister. I got a bad back. I got a landlord who won't fix my radiator. And I got 3 hours left on a graveyard shift. I didn't sit in front of that door for you. I sat there because a 7-year-old kid shouldn't have to deal with the messes his father makes." Aryan flinched. The words hit harder than the shrapnel in his shoulder. "Keep your money," she said, turning back to her bucket. "It's got blood on it anyway." "It's not blood money," Aryan lied smoothly, a reflex. "Sure it is," she shot back, her voice completely deadpan. "You walk in here smelling like a firing squad, looking like you fought a lawnmower, and you think I don't know what kind of man you are. I clean up after messes all night. I know what dirt looks like." Aryan lowered his hand. He looked at the cash, then slid it back into his pocket. He didn't feel angry. For the first time in a decade, he felt ashamed. "Why did you stay?" Aryan asked softly. "You could have walked away, called the police, hid." She paused, staring down at the murky gray water in the bucket. "Because a long time ago, someone should have sat in front of a door for my boy," she said quietly. The grit in her voice was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, devastating grief. "And they didn't, so I sat." She grabbed the handle of the bucket, the wheel squeaking loudly against the floor. "I'm going to clean the north wing. Do me a favor." Aryan looked at her, truly looking at her. "What?" "Don't get killed on my newly waxed floor. It's a bitch to get the stains out." She pushed the bucket down the hall, the rhythmic squeak fading into the ambient hum of the hospital. Aryan stood alone in the hallway, the smell of cheap pine cleaner suddenly feeling like the safest thing in the world. By 6 a.m., the adrenaline had completely metabolized into a toxic, heavy sludge in Arian's veins. His left arm was numb from the bicep down. The blood on his shirt had dried into a stiff brown crust that cracked every time he shifted his weight. Lyle was awake, breathing easily through a portable nebulizer, his small fingers clutching a plastic dinosaur a nurse had given him. He hadn't asked about the men in the house. He hadn't asked why his father looked like a car crash. The silence of a child who had seen too much was a unique kind of torture. Arian texted his extraction team. They were 10 minutes out. A stolen minivan, unremarkable. The Audi was a beacon. He tossed the keys into a biohazard bin on his way out of the room. Before he could leave the hospital, he had a loose end to tie. He found Narrowly in the basement. The sterile scent of the upper floors gave way to the humid, heavy smell of industrial laundry detergent, hot metal, and damp concrete. The break room was a windowless box painted a depressing shade of eggshell. Narrowly was sitting at a chipped laminate table. Her heavy boots were unlaced. She was eating a vending machine pastry wrapped in cellophane, staring at a blank television screen mounted in the corner. The hum of the massive refrigerators next door vibrated through the floorboards. Arian stepped into the doorway. He didn't try to mask his approach, letting his boots scuff against the linoleum. Narrowly didn't flinch. She took a bite of her pastry, chewed slowly, and finally turned her head. Her eyes were bloodshot. "You look worse in the light," she said. Her voice was flat, scraping against the quiet room. "You shouldn't have given me your name," Arian said. "It's printed on my badge, Genius." She tapped the cheap plastic rectangle clipped to her scrub top. Narrowly R. Environmental Services. "What do you want?" "I'm off the clock in 12 minutes. If you're here to offer me more bloody money, the answer is still no." Arian leaned against the doorframe. His shoulder screamed in protest. He ignored it. "Those men upstairs, the ones you turned away, they work for a man named Russo. Russo doesn't believe in coincidences, and he doesn't leave witnesses." Narrowly stopped chewing. She swallowed hard, the muscles in her throat working. She looked down at the half-eaten pastry, suddenly disgusted by it. She tossed it onto the table. It landed with a pathetic little slap. "I didn't see their faces," she said. It wasn't a defense. It was a negotiation. "It doesn't matter," Arian replied smoothly, though there was no pleasure in the truth. "They saw yours. They know you embarrassed them. In my world, that's a debt. They will come back, and they will wait for you to clock out." A heavy silence settled over the break room, suffocating and thick. Arian watched her process the information. He expected tears. He expected panic. He expected her to beg him for help. Instead, Narrowly dragged a hand down her face, letting out a long, ragged exhale. "I have a cat," she muttered, staring at the blank television. "He needs special food for his kidneys. Costs me $40 a week. If I have to go into hiding because 2 mobsters slipped on my floor wax, who's going to feed my cat?" Arian blinked. The sheer, absurd pragmatism of the concern completely threw him off balance. I can have someone pick up the cat." Narrowly looked up at him, her dark eyes flashing with sudden sharp anger. "I don't want your people in my apartment. I don't want you in my life. I just wanted to finish my shift and go to sleep." "That's not an option anymore." Arian pushed off the doorframe, taking a step into the room. "I have a car coming to the loading dock in 5 minutes. I'm taking my son. You're getting in the car with us." "Like hell I am," Narrowly snapped, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She grabbed her heavy steel wrench from the table. "You brought this mess to my floor. I survived 42 years in this city without needing a babysitter. and I sure as hell don't need one who looks like he just lost a knife fight in an alley. Arian's patience, thin as wet paper, finally tore. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't draw his gun, but his physical presence, tall, broad, and radiating violent intent, was usually enough to make grown men shrink. He stopped inches from her. She didn't back up. She raised her chin, her grip tightening on the wrench. "Listen to me," Arian said, his voice dropping to a harsh guttural register. "I am trying to keep you alive, not because I am a good man. I am a terrible man. But my son is breathing right now because you held a door. I pay my debts. You walk out the front entrance of this hospital, you won't make it to the bus stop." He could smell the cheap vanilla lotion on her hands, mixed with the harsh chemical odor of bleach. She stared up at him, her chest heaving slightly. The fear was there, buried deep, but it was overshadowed by a profound, exhaustion-fueled fury. "Loading dock," she spat, her voice trembling just enough to betray her. 5 minutes. But if you get blood on my coat, I'm hitting you with this wrench." The morning air was brutal. It was a damp, bone-chilling cold that cut straight through Arian's ruined suit as he stepped out onto the concrete platform of the hospital's loading dock. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, heavy with the threat of more rain. Lyle was clinging to Arian's good arm, his face buried in his father's waist. The boy was shivering, despite the oversized paramedic jacket someone had draped over his shoulders. Narrowly stood a few feet away, clutching her gray cardigan tight across her chest. She looked entirely out of place in the grim gray dawn. She carried a beat-up canvas tote bag and her steel wrench, refusing to let the tool out of her sight. A rusted blue Dodge Caravan pulled into the alleyway, its headlights cutting through the morning fog. It idled by the dumpsters, the exhaust pipe rattling a ragged rhythm. "That's us," Arian said quietly. He ushered Lyle forward. They were halfway down the concrete ramp when a black SUV turned into the far end of the alley. It didn't have headlights on. It was moving too fast. Arian's instincts fired before his conscious brain caught up. He shoved Lyle behind a stack of wooden pallets. "Stay down!" The SUV's tires shrieked as it slammed on the brakes, stopping diagonally to block the alley's exit. The side doors slid open before the vehicle even completely halted. Arian drew his Glock. The metal felt freezing against his palm. He aimed and fired in one fluid motion. The sharp crack of the gunshot echoed off the brick walls, deafening in the enclosed space. The front passenger window of the SUV shattered into a spiderweb of white glass. A man yelled, a wet, ugly sound. Gunfire returned immediately. Not precise, calculated shots. Sloppy, rapid fire. Bullets chewed into the concrete ramp, sending sharp chips of stone flying into the air. Arian dropped to a knee, his wounded shoulder flaring with blinding pain as he tried to stabilize his grip. He fired twice more, hitting the front quarter panel of the SUV. He was outgunned, and he was cornered. He glanced back. Narrowly was frozen near a massive green dumpster. She wasn't screaming. She was just staring at the sparks flying off the brick wall inches from her head. "Narrowly! Get down!" Arian roared, the sound tearing his throat. One of the men from the SUV stepped out from behind the door, raising a sawed-off shotgun. He wasn't aiming at Arian. He was aiming at the woman caught out in the open. Arian shifted his aim, but his arm betrayed him. The muscle spasm in his shoulder sent his shot wide, the bullet sparking harmlessly against the pavement. The man with the shotgun smirked, adjusting his footing. Narrowly didn't dive for cover. She didn't cower. Acting on pure, terrified adrenaline, she grabbed the heavy lid of the industrial dumpster and hurled it open with all her strength. It didn't block a bullet. It didn't take down the shooter. But as the heavy plastic lid slammed back, it knocked over a stack of unsecured, overflowing trash bags balanced precariously on the rim. 50 pounds of rotting cafeteria waste, soggy coffee grounds, and half-empty syrup containers cascaded down in a foul, liquid avalanche directly onto the shooter. The man slipped on a slick puddle of spoiled mayonnaise, his boots losing purchase on the wet concrete. The shotgun went off wildly, blowing a massive hole in the brick wall 10 feet above Nerali's head. The recoil, combined with the slippery garbage, sent the shooter crashing hard onto his back, his head bouncing off the pavement with a sickening hollow crack. Arian didn't hesitate. He surged forward, grabbing Nerali by the back of her cardigan, half dragging, half pushing her toward the idling minivan. "Go! Go!" he barked at the driver. He practically threw Nerali through the sliding side door, then scooped Lyle up from behind the pallets, tossing him onto the back seat before diving in himself. The minivan's tires spun against the wet asphalt, catching grip just as another man leaned out of the SUV and fired. The back window of the caravan exploded inward, showering them all in tiny, square cubes of safety glass. Arian tackled Lyle to the floorboard, covering the boy's body with his own. He waited for the burning punch of a bullet, but it didn't come. The minivan swerved violently, taking a hard right out of the alley and tearing into the morning traffic. The sound of gunfire faded, replaced by the chaotic blare of car horns and the rushing wind roaring through the shattered back window. For a long minute, no one moved. The only sounds in the car were the grinding of the transmission and the erratic, panicked breathing of the passengers. Slowly, Arian pushed himself off the floor. His ears were ringing, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the city noise. He checked Lyle. The boy was shaking violently, covered in glass dust, but unharmed. Arian slumped back against the upholstery. He looked across the seat. Nerali was pressed into the far corner of the van. Her messy bun had completely collapsed, her dark hair falling in chaotic curtains around her face. She was clutching her canvas tote bag so tightly her knuckles looked bruised. She smelled overwhelmingly of rancid coffee and old grease. She looked up at Arian. She looked at his bloody shirt, the gun still gripped in his hand, the glass glittering in his hair. She didn't look terrified anymore. She looked like a woman who had just realized she had crossed a line in the sand and could never, ever go back. She opened her mouth, her voice a dry, rasping whisper over the wind howling through the broken window. "If that man's brains are on my boots," Nerali said, staring blankly ahead, "I am charging you double." Arian leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes. The adrenaline was fading again, leaving behind a cold, hollow dread. The empire he built was burning. His enemies were closing in, and his only backup smelled like a dumpster. "Deal," Arian breathed. "Did Nerali just make the most dangerous friend in the city? Or has she painted a target on her own back? Arian's empire is crumbling, and the only person he can trust is a woman holding a mop. If you want to see how this unlikely alliance completely flips the criminal underworld upside down in Part 3, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me what Nerali should do next.